Good evening, everyone. My name is Connie Pascal, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the MI Colloquium. Also, because this is a special occasion, we are also really delighted to be co-sponsoring this event because this is also where the Beta Phi Mu Omicron chapter's Speaker of the Year is going to be presenting here in a few minutes. So a couple things to get started with before we go, just so that we're on the same page, know what's going on. So this is Cataloging with the Homosaurus, the Theory and Practice of Classifying Queerness. So the meeting info, so the video of this is going to be available in 1 week on the MI Colloquia playlist. Now, of course, because you are here, that's not exactly news to you, but please let other people know if that's the case. Audience, again, please stay muted throughout the presentation, although we are going to get quite interactive. So we do like a lively chat environment. Please put your questions in the chat or in Q&A and Zoom, and James, myself, and everyone else will be monitoring that. So as I mentioned before, this event is a sponsored event. Our co-sponsors are Beta Phi Mu. We're going to have James Fahey. He's going to come on in just a second here to talk a little bit about that. The New Jersey Center for the Book, RU Libraries, the Sky LIS Department, and the Sky Alumni Association are our co-sponsors. Here's our agenda for the evening. We're going to do welcomes and introductions. I think Emil is here. If not, we're going to skip right to James. But mostly we're going to kind of let Jay take it from there. Maybe Jay and King Arthur, the cat, will be taking it from there.
Again, Arthur.
Rough agenda. We will close the official recorded part of the lecture at 8 o'clock. But Jay has graciously agreed to stay on so a little bit afterwards so we can have some informal after hours kind of conversation for a few minutes. So with that, is Emil, are you here?
I didn't see him come in.
I didn't see him come in. So Emil is the actual faculty sponsor for the Beta Phi Mu, and he's also an assistant professor of librarian science. And if he pops in, we'll ask him to say hello in a second. But with that, I'd like to actually introduce Mr. James Fahey. So James is an alumni of our Sky program. He's got an which did you have an MLIS or an MI? What was your degree? Where were you?
MI. I graduated
right.
2.5 years ago.
Great. And also, James is the current president of Beta Phi Mu and one of the people responsible for bringing Jay to us. So with that, James, take it away.
So just filling in for Emil, just a quick introduction to Beta Phi Mu for those who aren't aware of it. It's an honor society, international honor society for the top third of graduates from participating colleges and universities with MI programs in libraries and information systems services. And the Omicron chapter, which is the Rutgers chapter, we feel very strongly that it's our mission to bring our members together and help them network with each other and advance their careers. And every year we sponsor scholarships for current students at Rutgers. So another aspect of what we do is raise money for the scholarships. I hope everyone is enjoying the beautiful fall colors. It doesn't feel like fall, but it is, and it really looks like it to me. I'm enjoying it. Probably everybody in attendance tonight knows more about tonight's topic than I do. However, I think it's fair to say that at its heart, Homosaurus is about helping people find information. And I'm on my seat, the edge of my seats. I have a strong passion about helping people find the information that they want, and also helping people understand that there is information that they are lacking. And that's an important part of human information behavior, is understanding what information you're lacking. So in this case, I've realized that I have an information gap, and I look forward to Jay helping bridge that gap. Before we get started, I do want to acknowledge a couple of people, starting off with Katrina Zwaff. She was the person who identified Jay as a speaker and Homosaurus as a topic, and proposed it to the Beta Phi Mu Omicron chapter board, and it's going to be very interesting. I also want to thank Connie Pascal and her team. This is a very professionally run event, and it's professionally run because Connie makes it happen. So kudos to Connie. Jay was talking earlier about alliteration, so there's a little alliteration for Jay. I also want to mention Sarah Pike and Will Bohr. Sarah is our membership chair, and she made the mailing that went out to our Beta Phi Mu members happen. And Will was responsible for our social media promotion of the event. So a little bit about Jay. Jay is currently the library director at the Bacalar Library. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did.
The Bacalar Library at Longy School of Music of Bard College. He is also a member of the Homosaurus editorial board. Previously, Jay was at the University of New Hampshire Diamond Library and at the University of Utah J. Willard Marriott Library. He's had various leadership roles in all kinds of little organizations along the way, but one of his roles was as a union representative at the University of New Hampshire Library. Unions being in the news a good deal these days. Jay has his MS from the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and his BA from the College of William and Mary. He is a member, not only is he a speaker for us tonight, he's a member of Beta Phi Mu, and he's also a member of Phi Kappa Phi, but we'll sort of let that go. Over the past 5 years, Jay has broadly published in books and journals, far too many to mention, and he speaks regularly on this and related subjects. So, friends and colleagues, I have the distinct pleasure of turning the floor over to Jay.
Thank you. You're going to make me blush. Everyone, go unionize your libraries, go unionize your graduate employee organizations, go unionize if you can. That's how I'm going to start the presentation. Thank you for pointing out that I was a union rep. Now I'm the man and I can't unionize, which is sad. So let me get my screen shared. Is it gonna let me? It's not like showing me the various. Is this gonna work?
No.
Oh, it's very much mad at me. I have to do my system preferences.
You want me to go ahead and share your presentation?
Yeah, you probably should. Darn it.
It's
Curse you, Apple products, for being really strict about privacy stuff. Probably should have checked that beforehand.
We were chatting instead of doing what
yes, we were being chatty Cathy's. So yeah, just start at the
just a second here. My apologies, everyone will get right to
cool.
Okay, there you go.
I always say that my favorite thing to happen when I do instruction or anything is for something to go wrong, because then it shows everyone that I'm just like them. So hello, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm really excited about this, and I feel really honored. I know when I was in grad school, I wanted to be inducted into Beta Phi Mu when I graduated, and I worked really hard to do so, including making sure that my grades were good the semester I was in a head-on collision. And then I was inducted, and it was like a really cool thing. I flew all the way back to Illinois from Salt Lake just for the weekend for it. I felt really honored that Beta Phi Mu asked me to come do this. And this is one of my favorite things to talk about. I was talking about the Homosaurus in my master's thesis before it was online. And now I'm on it, and I get to teach people about it. So it's just really cool. Don't let your dreams be dreams, So I titled this Cataloging with the Homosaurus, the Theory and Practice of Classifying Queerness, because I didn't want this to just be a workshop like some of the other ones I've given, where it's like, this is how you use the Homosaurus, because this is a mixture of practicing librarians as well as students. I wanted to get more into the theory that I might not get to otherwise in some of the other workshops, which is the thing I actually like talking about a lot. So next slide. Oh, also you can buy merch with the cute dinosaur on it if you want. It's there. So the agenda that we're going to go over, and this will be kind of short, but there's going to be a lot of us talking in it. So first I'm going to go over a little bit about who I am, why I'm the person talking to you about this, right? Then I'll go a little bit over like the Homosaurus history and context of it. Then we'll briefly go over some like best practices. How do you actually use the Homosaurus? I will spoil it and say that like our documentation and implementation stuff like is live now on the website. So you can actually look at documentation now, which is really exciting. So I hope everyone goes and looks at that like while we're talking. And then finally, I want to take a good like 15 minutes before we get to Q&A to talk about, to have like a group discussion about classifying queerness. You know, what do we do about the sort of antithetical nature of classification and queerness? And I will be sort of looking at the chat the best that I can. Again, please save kind of complex questions for the end. But if there's like a very quick thing that I can maybe answer, I'll try to do that like as I see them. Cool. Next slide. All right. So who am I? So you already know my name, J.L. Colbert. It is not Colbert. No, I'm not related to him. I've checked. I know he lives in New Jersey though. And I use he, him pronouns. And I'm the library director, like that's my job title at the Longy School of Music. It's not Longy, but it's because it's French. I also didn't know until I started working there. And by library director, I mean I'm the only librarian because it's a real small music conservatory. So don't make it, you know, I'm not that fancy. And something that might be relevant to this is based on my master's thesis, one of the journal articles that I wrote that kind of gets the most traction around this topic that you may have heard about or even been assigned in a class or something is it's was published in the Library with the Lead Pipe, patron-driven subject access, how librarians can mitigate that power to name. That was published under my dead name. So if you're like, hey, I've read that, but that's not your name, that's why. That was before I transitioned. And I just haven't changed my name on it. But that was the entire reason I got into this whole line of work. Was I was doing a project for my very first grad school class and was like, hey, I wonder if there's been a study about like getting how people actually search for like queer topics and comparing that to Library of Congress subject headings. And there wasn't. So I did one. And like to my knowledge, it might still be one of the only ones. But I sort of like investigated sort of how we think about the purpose of subject vocabularies and that they're not just for organizing information, they're so that people can find things. So if you haven't read it, I might change. If I wrote it today, I would probably change some things, but that's the nature of publishing, right? Next slide. And if there's any questions, I can't like see the chat actively, so just like let me know. So a little bit about the Homosaurus. A lot of people are really surprised to learn that the Homosaurus, what we call like version 0, started in 1997 in Amsterdam. Because there is a cool like library and archives there that I believe is housed within the like public library in Amsterdam, or maybe it's the Dutch National Library. I think it's just the Amsterdam Public Library, called ILIA. And that stands for something in Dutch, and my Dutch isn't very good. But it's just a library about an archive about like queer heritage, especially within the Netherlands. And the Homosaurus was its own in-house subject vocabulary. And it included like like words for all sorts of subjects because it was the only subject vocabulary that they used. Cut to 2013, and in between there, they worked with like Ellen Greenblatt, whose name you might know if you're interested in like ethical metadata, to sort of make the scope broader. So it's not just about the L and the G. There's also a B and a T and other things, right? So make that broad, broaden what queerness is, and also introduce a more like Library of Congress style of hierarchy to like structure the subject headings, right? Don't just have words. Then KJ Rawson, who's at Northeastern University here in Boston, who also does the Digital Transgender Archive. Great project, please go look at it. Gets involved, and we narrow the scope. So, we brought in queerness, but now we're like, what if this isn't meant to be the only subject vocabulary that a library uses? What if this is literally only subject terms that relate to queer culture and history and life somehow? And then we rely on it like other vocabularies to complement it, right? What if we use this with LCSH and not instead of, right? So that was when that happened in 2019. So I was already out of grad school then. Like when I was writing about it in grad school, it was a Word document on KR Roberto's laptop. And I was sent the file and got to look at it. So that was like before it gets put online and gets turned into a linked data vocabulary as well. If you are a dork and like linked data like me, in our documentation, we have like how the SCOS stuff is mapped. You can download the Homosaurus in triples, lots of other different types of like RDF, different formats, because we want the Homosaurus to sort of be able to talk with other vocabularies. Like you can use the Homosaurus within Wikidata and Wikipedia, for example. It's compatible with like Library of Congress's like linked data vocabularies and stuff. So that interoperability was really important. And also this is when it first gets put online, which is really cool. And then other people can use it. And then I joined in about like 2020, I think. And then in 2021, we get version 3, where we changed identifier. So if you know anything about linked data, there's these thing called URIs, Uniform Resource Identifier. And that is how the computer knows that that thing is that thing, right? So it'd be like your social security number would be like your URI, right? Uniform Resource Identifier, yeah. Train of thought, right? And so our URIs were like the word, but that's not good because what happens if you need to change your subject heading? Then that breaks your URI. And so we changed it to alphanumeric, like number identifiers. And that way we had the freedom to change our subject headings without it breaking things, which is really nice. We also added support for other languages, so we could tag when a word was like perhaps in another language. So I'm the one responsible for all of the like slash fiction and fan fiction terms that got added, including all of the like stuff about yaoi and everything. And so like the word yaoi is in the Homosaurus and has the little Japanese tag on it. So that's my fault. I'm sorry. And now we're also working on getting it translated into other languages. We got on Fox News because we got a grant to translate it into Spanish. So that was fun. Tucker Carlson got mad at us, which crowning achievement in our life, I got to say. My dad was very proud of me. And we also are doing a lot of collaborations with places like the Leather Archives and Museum to work on a kink and BDSM vocabulary that will be in ours, but that is primarily for them to use. We have worked with like an intersex organization for terms about intersex people, for example. So that's some of the stuff that's being added. And if you want to read more about that history as well as the board members, that's the URL right there. And yeah, next slide. Cool. So best practices. I like minimalist slide design. I promise we're going to be talking a lot in this little chunk here. So sort of rule one about using the Homosaurus, because this is related to queerness, and that's so related to identity. And if you know anything about queer people or queer terminology or queer language or anything like that, you'll know that terms for identity change over time, and what is offensive now might not have been offensive then, or whatever, right? And so when you're using the Homosaurus, kind of the very first thing you want to keep in mind is self-identification, right? If you have, for instance, maybe a photograph that has a street queen in it, and you can read more about policies like this at the Digital Transgender Archive. They even have a harm reduction guide that's really interesting. I can find that and send it to y'all, put it in the chat. But like, if you get a street queen, you should not try to assume the gender of that person based on our contemporary ideas of gender and gender presentation and all that. For example, I believe in the Digital Transgender Archive, like Marsha P. Johnson, I do not think is referred to as a trans woman, because that is not how she referred to herself as. She called herself gay. She called herself a drag queen. She called herself a street queen. We, like the Digital Transgender Archive, identifies her the way she did, or like based on the information that's in that photo. They don't try to assign identity without knowing that that's how that person identified. I believe it's a good practice, no matter what kind of collection you have or kind of material you're working on. Sometimes people will get books and it's like they'll want to tag it based on the identity of the author, even if the book isn't about that at all, right? There was actually a big hubbub. I was on the group that was like the ad hoc committee to tell people to not put gender in name authority records, because it's like we don't need that. You know, it was too complicated. Nothing good can come from it. So there's like stuff like that, right? Now, a thing you might want to think of, like, above all, and you'll see I have this on here, like, you want to consider your collection and how your community might search it, right? Like, if you think that it will enhance discoverability to maybe put an anachronistic term with a current term, just to make sure that that like keyword is grabbed when someone's searching for it, like a researcher or a student, you know, maybe it is a good idea then to put the way you know that person identified, and also the way we might identify them now if we didn't know better, right? So there's not, like, people get very frustrated with us when they ask us like, oh, what do I do about this? And we're like, like, there's not a one size fits all answer. And when you're doing this kind of work, a thing you have to be comfortable with is you are never going to make everyone happy. Someone is going to get mad at you. People get mad at us all the time. People get mad at KJ for having, quote, like dead names in the Digital Transgender Archive, when KJ is a trans man and knows the people in that, like, the angry people are referring to, and knows that he has like permission to post those names, right? So like, people are going to get mad at you, so you just have to like kind of be comfortable with that. So yeah, self-identification is like a really good thing. Like, don't just assign things because you think that that's the proper identification term. You do not know better than a person about their own identity, even if the way that they identify themselves may not be like correct, quote unquote, to us now, right? I get people mad at me all the time that I like the term transsexual for myself. People are like, that's a bad word. I'm like, is it? Queer is a bad word, technically, I guess. So like, you don't know better than the people whose lives you're cataloging, right? And that kind of brings us to the one of the hot button, like really complicated, sticky areas about working with the Homosaurus is slurs slash reclaimed terms, because sometimes those are the same thing, as well as historical terms. People are like, I don't know when to use a historical term, if I do at all. Am I allowed to use this reclaimed term? Should I use a slur at all? And again, there's not a one size all fits answer, but again, try to think of this in like a harm reduction kind of thing, as well as what is best for your patrons. Because like, yes, the Homosaurus, like we are talking about people, but also you're not cataloging people, you're cataloging objects that might be about people. And so you have to be sensitive about that. But it's an object, which people could be objects too, I guess. Ooh, philosophy, I don't know. But yeah, so sometimes you might want to use a term that is might feel weird for you to use. The one I like to use a lot is what if you get like dikes to watch out for? I think using dikes as a subject heading would be appropriate for that, maybe. Uh, there's this great book that is like a sort of like radical queer text called "Why Are Faggots So Afraid of Faggots?" Using that slur might be good for it, right? Even though it feels uncomfortable. Queer is a slur, right? And it feels uncomfortable to use. So like, don't like, rule of thumb is don't use slurs, but sometimes they are appropriate, right? Same thing with historical terms. Probably you will use these more in an archival setting, like say you have digital collections or whatever. But probably you won't need to use historical terms, except maybe depending on like your community, how might they be searching? Is your community maybe not full of a lot of younger folks, or maybe there's not a lot of queer people in your library community who might not know all the current lingo? Maybe it would be useful to put in like older terms. We change words every day, like it's going to happen. In our documentation, we have rules, like not rules, but like we have these best practices about like, what do you do about slurs? What do you do about reclaimed terms? What do you do about historical terms? Especially most of the slurs in the Homosaurus are related to indigenous people. And they were the terms that like anthropologists gave them. Don't use those. Right? Like, unless I would say like you have permission from like your local tribal like community members of like that would be a helpful term to put in there. Like, don't do that. Like, just don't. Yeah, so slurs, don't use them, but sometimes they're appropriate. Slang, this is the one I love to talk about because it's my favorite joke in the world. Shakespeare walks into a gay bar and then he exits pursued by a bear. It's my favorite joke in the whole world. Because like bear is a slang term for a like type of like gay or queer man. And Library of Congress actually has bears, like in parentheses, like gay culture. Homosaurus has the same one. And it's important to use those, I promise. You're not going to break your index with slang or community specific terms or terms that are common words elsewhere. And it's important to use these terms because that is the language of queerness. We have had to use language that can hide into everyday speech or that won't be understandable by other people in order to survive. Don't keep erasing it because your index or whatever. And that's also why linked data is important, because the linked data is going to be different. And it's important like to use us and not just Library of Congress, because say you have something and you're like, oh, this isn't about bears, this is about otters, actually. If you go into Library of Congress, that's a variant term for bears. And if you get on Grindr with that assumption, you're going to be very confused, right? Whereas we have those as two separate terms, right? The way that we classify ourselves is complex. and isn't always understood. I still believe female impersonators and drag queens is like the same thing in Library of Congress subject headings, and those are not the same thing. So that's another thing. Like, use slang, use the community specific words. You're not going to break your index. That's my like big rule. And then so yeah, again, consider your collection and who might be searching it, and who is the patron in your head, and who are you excluding with, like, who is the what, because the patron in your head is just one patron who you've made up, and who in your community are you excluding in that. Like, that's a good way to sort of think through your biases about who you're cataloging for. And then again, use this with LCSH and other vocabularies, especially around race. That's the big one we get asked a lot, is what do we do about the terms regarding race and ethnicity? Because we do have a lot in the Homosaurus, but we don't have everything. And especially with Indigenous terms. And we like to say, like, we're not the only alternative vocabulary out there. There are a lot of Indigenous subject heading vocabularies out there now. There's ones around race. There's like, they're out there. Get in the habit of using like these specialized vocabularies together with something like LCSH, because when more and more libraries start like breaking the monopoly of Library of Congress subject headings, like start getting rid of the idea that it's the only game in town, when we think about like, oh, we could use it as a base and then have all of these other things around it, then we don't have to put so much energy into trying to make LCSH perfect, of trying to fix it, right? Which is something that I want to talk about in the next slide. And there's a link to the documentation and implementation guide that is also on the Homosaurus website. It's just a Google Doc, and it is constantly being revised as well. So, as well as like, how do you do mark cataloging and stuff? I didn't want to get into that. All right, next slide. Cool. With the time we have left, this is not time for questions, but I want to have a discussion. Because I was excited because I was like, ooh, we can talk about theory and stuff now. Classifying queerness, right? Because like, my favorite thing about working on the Homosaurus is that queerness defies classification. The point of queerness is that it cannot have borders, or if it does, they are porous and flexible. Whereas taxonomies and classification, their entire purpose is to create borders, and borders necessitate policing, right? Borders are inherently violent. They are always exclusionary, and they are always like, anytime you try to make more specific and specific terms, it just creates like a bigger problem, because you're excluding more and more people who don't fit into the definition that you just made. So with that being said, what is the Homosaurus even doing? You know, what are we doing about like queer ethical cataloging, and what do we do going forward? So I would love to open this up now for discussion. I would love people to like come on video if they feel comfortable, but I understand that people might not feel comfortable turning their cameras on. But please, I want to have a discussion for the time we have left.
Hard to believe we have such shy people.
Yeah.
It always starts.
Maybe a way to start it off is one of my big inspirations. And if you haven't read it, or it hasn't been assigned to you in your library school, go read it. Is Queering the Catalog by a current ALA Marxist lesbian president, Emily Drabinsky. We love her, support her.
She teaches for us. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yes. She has also
Solidarity for
been
Emily.
a colloquium speaker.
Yay. Oh, I mean, I feel in good company now. She's really cool. But Queering the Catalog, she's not a cataloger. But she wrote about this exact issue of queerness not being definable, and how subject headings are always already incorrect and out of date. And so that the onus of trying to always have like the politics of correction and obfuscation, that always just like, don't just make it on catalogers to like be building the railroad tracks to make sure the train doesn't crash. Like, public services librarians should also be speaking with patrons about this as well. Like, this should be all of us. It shouldn't be a hidden labor that goes on.
Yeah,
So I
actually,
like that. Yeah.
Jay, that segues neatly into a question I had. I'm a big fan of involving patrons in library decisions and um, integrating the patrons not just as people who come in and use the library, but as part of the force that shapes the library. How does that work with something like Homosaurus? Is that something that you would advocate forming a committee, a bunch of representatives, or would you do crowdsourcing, or is this something that really needs to be done by a few experts?
It's a good question. I mean, like there's a question of scalability, and there's also a question of with any sort of marginalized group, a representative is never going to stand for everybody or represent like monolithic views. And so always like having the more opinions, the better, but sometimes that's not feasible. And also like weighing getting information versus patron privacy, right? Like this study I did like semi-structured like interviews, but you know, that might not be feasible at a bigger scale, right? But is keystroke logging the way to go, or is that going to violate privacy, right? Are the things that people searching so specific that it might, you know, be personally identifiable? So I think like I I like to honor the expertise of people who are trained, right? Um, like, however, I believe that everybody has a like expertise and authority and can learn from each other. So like the person who like knows maybe the like structure and maybe broader ethics or context around cataloging or making these decisions, like that would be a good person to like make decisions, but I believe those should always be informed. But something I've seen Violet Fox talk about is the sort of like user-centric or patron-centric view of librarianship often erases the expertise and labor of library workers. And this is something Cory Doctorow actually writes about in Choke Point Capitalism, where like the focus on like the customer or the front end person is often at the expense of the people who create those things. So I don't want to erase our expertise, but that expertise should be informed. Did that answer? I like open this up, like what do other people think? And I see that Sean has posted a chat as well, so we'll get to that after. Yeah. But yeah, James, did I address your concern?
Yes, I agree with the notion of you know having a core that's expert, but I do believe that the experts can also be disconnected
Yes.
from the user base and so focused on their expertise and what they think they know.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, every community is different.
Mm-hmm.
The community that's being addressed in an implementation of Homosaurus at UCLA might be very different from the implementation at a place like the Library of Congress
Yep.
or a public library someplace, New York Public Library. Those
Yeah.
implementations would be very different because the communities are different. And so
Mm-hmm.
even if you have the same experts involved, if they're not um, connected to the community and informing their decisions with input from the community, um, they may miss something.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they're faulted. It's not that they lack expertise. It's um, it's just that there's an information gap that they're not aware of.
Yeah.
Agreed. Like, and that's why it's so important for catalogers to not be siloed away as the only people doing this, and like for the people who work more closely with the patron base to like help, as well as like getting, you know, input or like For example, like the Homosaurus, like for we try to like seek like outside groups or scholars to do collaborations with, because even though we're international, most of us are white and most of us are in North America, and so we realize that that's a blind spot and a bias that we all have. Most of us are trans though, which is really fun. But like something that like changed my whole view when I was in grad school is I went to the Illinois Library Association conference in 2015, and someone gave a presentation about how they noticed that all of their patron base at a public library, anytime they searched for video games, most people just searched for PS4, no matter what system they were looking for games for. And so that cataloger just made a public, like a note, like a 5xx whatever, and just put PS4 on all of the video games, just so that they would show up so people could find them. And that was just because that was something that he noticed, right? Just like getting to know the community that was using his library, and some of the ways that they were searching. It's one of my favorite things.
So Jay, did you want to tackle Sean's question?
Yeah, so Sean says, I suppose one potential starting point is to define queerness versus a given hegemonic culture. That is a whole can of worms. It's just a question of which can of worms you prefer. Yeah, so like one thing that I think sometimes we at least when I approach this work with classification and like taxonomies and queerness is like separating these terms from, like, we like to say that we're not the identity police. Sometimes people are like, oh great, these are the words that I should use to refer to my friends and family who are queer, and we're like, no, that there's a lot of words in here and not all of them you should use, right? Tucker Carlson famously said that a lot of the words in the Homosaurus are not things that he could say on television, and he is correct. So like we're not a dictionary for how you should refer to actual people. And so any sort of classification we do doesn't have that weight to it. We also, one of the nice things about being like a linked data vocabulary and not having the rigid structure that maybe something like LC does, is that we can have slang and like community specific terms alongside, concurrent with like more official terms without it breaking everything. Like we don't have the thing where Library of Congress has like the word that refers to the concept, right? We recognize that slang, even if it's kind of referring to the same thing, that's still different context. So we will have like FTM, F2M, female to male, like those are all different terms, right? And then we've got like slang terms like that alongside medical terms, for example. And so like not having such a rigid thesaurus structure has actually helped the classification not feel so Victorian, I guess. If that makes sense.
Jamie,
We
is
have
a
another
question.
yeah.
Jamie, do you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question?
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Yes.
Good to see you,
Cool.
Jamie.
Yeah, I'm outside, so that's why I was asking. I'm watching with a friend from the program. Also, hi,
Sorry,
Jay.
I said slurs in front of your friends.
No, that they're right on the same page. It's fine. Also,
Cool.
hi. It's nice to actually meet you after years of following you on Twitter. Yeah. So I was wondering if you knew of or had any examples of folks outside of LCHS, in their organization systems, like in medical libraries or public libraries, other systems.
Yes, there are so many that we don't know who all they are. And Connie, thank you for posting. I was going to get to it at the end, but I also probably would have forgotten. So thank you. There's a Google group for the community to join, of like people who are using Homosaurus, people who are thinking about it, people who are implementing it. I know that the University of Kentucky uses it because one of our board members was part of the implementation process. and is no longer there, but did a presentation on that, and that's why we asked them to join the board. There is a tech services consortium for public libraries in Illinois that used it, and they actually asked me to give the workshop for them, and then that person went on to like write an article about it, which has been published. I was the peer reviewer for it, which felt cool, and then asked me to do the like library journal workshop lecture thing as well. So there's actually a lot of universities and public libraries that are using it. A lot of museums are using it. The Digital Transgender Archive uses it. I mean, it's the same person who runs both, so that makes sense. But yeah, lots of places are using it. I know that there's like a macro for connection for Homosaurus that's in the documentation. We also have like a spreadsheet linked in the documentation of known publications about people implementing it and using it in different contexts, or just studies about it, including posters and videos and articles and blog posts and all sorts of stuff. I even had a like content, like I think he's called like the content wrangler, and he does a lot of stuff for like content creators, not the YouTube influencer kind, but people who write like copy or stuff like that. Had me actually talk about it because he does a lot of stuff with link data, and like had me do a presentation on it because they were just like, oh, this is a thing, even though they're not in the glam like archives, libraries, or museums sector.
So Jay, I have a quick question.
quick.
What surprised you lately
About Homosaurus, or
about the Homosaurus? Yeah, about your work in classifying queerness. Because I mean, we have such a fraught communication environment. We're making inroads. Are we winning, losing, going around?
Yeah. I would say that as far as like stuff in the Homosaurus, not a lot has surprised me. Well, who's ringing my doorbell? Well, they're gonna have to wait. I guess I mean the Fox News thing surprised me. That was a fun thing to wake up to one Saturday morning. But I guess like actually a thing that surprises me a little is the way that sometimes people are using harm reduction sometimes as a way to be patronizing, where it's mostly like white.
Could you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Yeah. So I also like to think about this with like harmful language statements as well, which I'm in support of, but like so often it's white librarians who are kind of doing this work, right? Most of us are white. And then we are the ones deciding what is harmful to our indigenous communities, to our Black patrons, our patrons of color, right? Like it can, like one of the reasons that like I did my original like master's thesis and study was because I was tired of like in the crit cat space, like seeing people like being like, oh, well, this Library of Congress subject heading is bad. Here's what it should be. And I'm like, and you came to that decision how? Like where people like, because they have the authority and expertise and, you know, thinking that they sort of can make these decisions, kind of like what James was talking about earlier. And so I sometimes it sounds weird when I'm like, I'm not always a huge fan of the harmful language statements and stuff like that because of sort of often the contexts under which they're created. And how another great article for all of the library school students to read is called "Do We Deracialized?" And it's about how the language used to refer to Black and African Americans in the Dewey Decimal System how that has changed over time, and how changing it wasn't actually like about fixing any wrongs. It was just about obfuscating mistakes and not reckoning with anything. And so that sort of is, I mean, it's not surprising, but like people take on and do a lot of this work without thinking of they're doing it because, oh, it would look good for their library to be doing it, or it's the hot new thing that everyone's doing, and they don't think about the sustainability of keeping these projects up. They don't think about who are they speaking for, how are they making those decisions, stuff like that.
Interesting. Great point. A lot to think about. Katrina, take yourself off mute and ask your question. We've only got about 5 minutes left. We want to get a couple of closing statements from James and Jay as well, but great question, Katrina.
Okay, so I'm lucky that we are one of the libraries who are able to use Homosaurus. I was thrilled when we were told to just go crazy. But people who work in libraries who haven't implemented it, what's your advice on getting buy-in from like the administration for them to implement it locally?
Yeah, and I would say that that can also be kind of maybe trickier now, especially for public librarians, in our current climate, depending on the state that you're in. But I will say that that journal article that came out last year does talk about how they got buy-in at the consortia level for it. And a lot of it had to do with like, these are the things in their collection, and like talking about how Library of Congress isn't actually like good enough to make things discoverable about those things for their patrons. Show how like how many other libraries are doing this, kind of do the whole like, hey, everyone else is doing it, and so we should too. Like, that's not why you should do it, but it's a good thing to leverage. But definitely like just showing like, this is our collection. We want our collection to be discoverable, don't we? I would say would be like a good place to start. But definitely in that article, it talks a lot about buy-in, and the name is escaping me off the top of my head. But
we have a question about, it might be a little technical, about the macro in the OCLC, if you want to tackle that, or you want to wait until after hours.
I don't know a lot about it, except that it exists. But a lot of people talk about it in that Google community group. And I believe that there is documentation for it. And I think for Mark Edit, especially, I believe that there's like tutorials and videos on like how to use it, like with Mark Edit maybe, or with Connection. There's like, I know Bobby Bothman's actually one that's talked a lot about it. He didn't create it, but I know he was the one who made it, posted a lot about it. But yeah, otherwise I don't know. And I don't do a lot of cataloging anymore.
Well, I have
Jay,
one last question here before, so we didn't
and
start.
I have one too, Connie.
Okay.
So you go first, and then I have a quick question.
Great. So walk me through a little bit about what you do on the editorial board. How does you just, again, the 30-second version of, what does that mean and entail?
It means we get together in a Zoom meeting and we look at subject headings and scope notes with a fine-tooth comb and think about all of the ways that people might take it the wrong way.
Wow.
And all
Sounds
of like
like
we
fun.
try to be like, yeah, and also like, if people don't have closed offices, then they try to like have to whisper when we talk about naughty words, and not safe for work things, which is often. But like, yeah, just sort of going through and like talking through terms together that we are creating, that we are proposing, that other people propose. If you have an idea for a word on the Homosaurus, you can propose it. Like, it's not just us coming up with words. A lot of the things that we do is because people sent them in, and we're like, that's a good idea, we should do that, and then we do it. Including like, if you see a current term and you're like, hey, I disagree with why you did this, tell us, and we might change it.
Is the Homosaurus funded in any way, or how is it supported financially?
Like, it's sort of housed at Northeastern right now, just because that's where KJ Rawson is. I know that to do the Spanish language translation, there was a federal grant for that. Again, that's why Tucker Carlson got mad at us. But beyond that, I think there might be some grant funding. I know we are hiring like a software developer person, and we had a grad assistant for a while. But the ins and outs, KJ would know more about that than I do. We are all volunteers.
Well, thank you for doing that work, without a doubt. It's been fascinating. James, would you like to?
Yeah,
this up?
just a quick question, Jay. I have thank you for a great description of how Homosaurus is structured and the concept and how it works. I'd like to understand how, from a patron's point of view, it manifests. How a patron knows it's there and knows to access it, or do they not know? They just sit down and use a catalog the way they would normally use it, and it's magically working.
I mean, they will show up like any other subject headings would, as long as like your system is displaying local subject headings. Or even they don't even have to be local subject headings, because there's an official MARC coding for Homosaurus now. So you can use them in the 650, in the 655 fields. You don't have to do it in like a 690 or whatever. So you can use it like you would a Library of Congress subject heading. So that would be how patrons would see it. And they wouldn't know that it was a Homosaurus term, just like they wouldn't know that it's a Library of Congress term, unless the librarians do that kind of like work of making it visible, of like saying like, hey, we're implementing this cool thing at our library, making patrons aware that they're doing that work instead of it all just being hidden. That's, otherwise patrons wouldn't see it any more than they see Library of Congress stuff.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
James,
So Connie, are you going to wrap up?
Go ahead, James. Any parting comments for the group?
No, I just want to thank Jay for coming and taking the time to tell us about Homosaurus and educate us. I feel like a gap has been bridged, and for Beta Phi Mu, this is exactly the kind of thing that we want to be doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Jay, would you like to offer any closing comments?
Sure.
Call to action.
Yeah. So again, this work of queer metadata, of ethical metadata, this shouldn't just be the work of the queer librarians. This shouldn't just be the work of the Black librarians, of the Indigenous librarians, of the catalogers. This should be every single library worker should care about their collection being accessible and discoverable to all of their patrons, and to educate themselves on how to do that.
Great.
That would be my closing remark.
Thank you very, very much. I'm going to give you the Zoom wave there.
I'm sorry that my cat didn't show up ever.
That's okay. We'll get King Arthur the next time around. So thank you everyone for joining me. We are going to stop the recording here in a couple seconds, and again we'll stick around a little bit after hours for that. But I want to let you know that our next colloquium is going to be Twitter's extreme changes, what they mean for the future of public discourse, with our own Tawfiq Amari. And the big challenge there will be to stop Tawfiq from using swear words to describe Elon Musk. But with
let him speak.
Yeah. We wanted to call it Elon Musk F off, but we thought that would not be appropriate. So anyway, with that, again, I bid you adieu. Jay, thank you very, very much for your time. Beta Phi Mu, it's always a pleasure to co-sponsor with you guys. And with that, I will say, good night.
Yay.
Yay.
Good night, everybody.
And I can hang out for a little bit. Yeah.
I'm going to hang out. I'm going to stop the recording.